Ascension. My name is Billy Daniel. I am the rector here, and we are grateful that you've come for our book event with our bishop and Laurie Brock, who's going to have a good conversation, and the bishop will introduce her to you, so I won't steal his thunder. But we are grateful that you are here, and I will remind you that this is partly sponsored by Spiritus Knox, the Center for Spiritual Practice and Learning here in Ascension with the Diocese of East Tennessee. And it is a good partnership. And for those of you who are not familiar with Spiritus Knox, we have a growing center here led by our director, Caroline Vogel, with lots of opportunities to deepen your spiritual life. Offerings every Sunday evening at 5 p.m., and I encourage you to explore more of those on our website at spiritusknox.com. And you can also join us here in this space where you're seated every Sunday morning at 8 a.m. and 10:30 a.m. And you don't want to miss out this Sunday, because this Sunday is a special Sunday in Ascension. It's annual meeting. Everybody's favorite Sunday of the church year. But we are taking a new spin on that, so I do encourage you to attend and to be here for those festivities. But without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to our Bishop, Brian Cole, who will introduce our guest, Laurie Brock.
Thank you, Billy. So good evening. It's good to be at Ascension. I'm grateful for the space and grateful for your presence here tonight. Laurie Brock is the rector of St. Michael's Episcopal Church in Lexington, Kentucky. And Laurie and I were colleagues in Lexington for 5 years. It's been a while back, but we had Mallory McDuff here, a great friend from Asheville. Laurie is another great friend, is a thoughtful preacher, a very good writer, and we would do Monday movies, that we'd go to the movies together on Mondays, and that was a part of our practice. And you were here when I was consecrated bishop, and I think you sat over there.
You put us in the back row.
Put you in the back over there, and in the skybox. And but Laurie has, a part of her time in Lexington, you have rediscovered an interest in horses. So how did that come to be?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for welcoming me. This is wonderful to be back here in Knoxville and in Ascension. I came to St. Michael's, Lexington. Actually, I will be in my 13th year on Christ the King Sunday. I was only planning to stay about 4 or 5 years. So that is what God does with plans. And I had been there a year and realized that I was quickly becoming one of those priests that never does anything but the church. And in theory, that might sound like a good idea, but in practice, you're the people that everybody runs away from at a cocktail party. Because you talk about things like the annual meeting as if that's interesting. Like, I'm a rector. If I could not, my bishop said you have to do an annual meeting, because I just assume not. But, and so my therapist at the time helped me recall some words that I heard frequently from my dean at seminary that said, get a hobby. Do something that is your life. And I wish I could tell you that I had sort of a St. Paul moment, but I found a Groupon for horse riding. And this was back when Groupon was actually cool and useful. So I found a Groupon for horse riding, and it was for saddle seat. I'd never ridden saddle seat. I had ridden very early in my life Western and had ridden Western some in college, but hadn't ridden for over a decade before I get to Lexington. And I bought the Groupon for 5 lessons, and I took 5 lessons, and I thought, oh, this is what it feels like to find your soulmate. So I've been riding ever since, usually 2 or 3 times a week, and one of the things I discovered is that I found that I was Laurie, the person in the barn, because frequently in our lives we become very associated with the roles we inhabit, the priest, the mother, the father, the lawyer, whatever that role is. And I think one of the great gifts of our faith and God's love is that we are known for who we are. And we spend a great deal of our time in our lives getting all these labels and building our resume. And then we hit about like 40 and we think, oh, who am I? And then God spends the next, until you die, pulling off those labels. And that's hard work, and I'm just so thankful that horses have helped me in that work, to find out who I am without the label of priest or Mother Laurie, and horses will never ask me how the copy machine works, and they will never text me to say, when was that meeting again? And so that's how I found it, and just continued to ride and ride. And I've been riding at the barn I'm at now about 10 years.
So I'm aware in reading the book, it's obvious to me for you the experience of riding a horse is this sort of contemplative practice. And when I think of a contemplative practice, I think of being at a monastery, being still, being quiet, not near a large animal that could hurt me. And I know there's some folks here who are also horse folk who might totally get your jam. But help me understand how being on a horse is a contemplative practice, and what does that even feel like?
Well, I do have a chapter in God, Grace, and Horses about like my marginally failed attempt at centering prayer. They're all nodding like, oh yeah. So, because I thought for whatever reason I needed to meet with one of my colleagues who's a Buddhist monk and, sit and be quiet. And that lasted like 4 sessions. I was like, I gotta go ride a horse. Because one of the things that horses do for me, and I think horses do period, is by their very creation, they invite us to go within. Horses on the food chain are at the bottom, like they're dinner for wolves and for mountain lions and for humans. And so because they are prey animals, they are astute and alert to all sorts of things that those of us that are predators, and I think we kind of forget that humans are predators, miss. Because we're not worried about what might be in the bushes to eat us. We probably ought to be, but we're not. But horses can pick up on feelings and movements and sounds that we ignore. Part of the gift of contemplative practice is that when we still ourselves and when we quiet all of the thoughts and all of the noise that lives within us, we have to hear things. And horses just hear stuff. The number of times I've gone to the barn thinking that I was all sassy and everything's good and life is great, and I got on a horse in the first 10 minutes, they informed me that no, I wasn't good and I was stressed out and tired and I needed to get my act together and pay attention. Because to ride a horse well, you have to be quiet enough to listen to them. And a horse will not turn around and say, get your hands off the reins, you're pulling the bit through my brain, you idiot. But they'll buck, and they'll pull. And so you have to, part of that contemplative practice is getting quiet enough to hear the horse talk to you. And when we're quiet enough to hear the horse talk to us, we're also quiet enough to hear God talk to us. It's that level of quiet. It's that level of paying attention. It's that level of breathing. I mean, I would say riding a horse is 75% controlling your breath, because you cannot ride a horse if you're holding your breath. And when do humans hold our breath? When we're anxious and when we're stressed out and when we're freaking out about the world. So horses make you breathe. Horses make you sit. I will guarantee you right now that everybody thinks they're sitting, right?
Yes.
Yeah, just in case, except the one person who's taking pictures there. But if you take a breath and then let it out and think about dropping about an inch deeper into the pew, what happens? How many of you actually felt yourself sit deeper into the pew with that? Well, that's what you have to do on a horse. Now, it can kill you, so there's always sort of that. I like contemplative prayer with a little bit of zest. And horses give me that. Because I think that one of the things we miss with contemplative prayer isn't just silence. It's a silence to listen to God and listen to ourselves. And horses provide that for me. And I think there's a lot of ways to do people hike contemplatively. I think hiking is glorified walking, but I guess people could snow ski contemplatively. I've snow skied a few times. It horrified me. Can't do that. Skis scare me. Horses don't, but the skis do. So I think part of it is, for me, getting into a place where the world stays out there and remembering that I have to be fully present to where I am. Because if I'm not fully present to where I am, this 1,000-pound animal under me will remind me that that is a grave error in judgment. And we live our lives not present in our world. It's always about, what did I do that I should have done, or what have I not done? And I think for all the language we have about contemplative prayer, we almost make it too distant for people, when at the end of the day, it is about creating space to be present with God in that moment. And horses can do that, for me, better than anything else I've discovered on earth.
At some point, I know you're going to want to read from the book, but I also have a question. So a part of the experience of writing is to be Laurie the person, but I'm sure at some point somebody outed you, and they learned you were a priest. So often, those of us who are clergy can get so wrapped up in church stuff, right? And I'm just always around church things. Have there been particular experiences of how people, and it's not that you become a pastor necessarily at the barn, maybe you have, but I'm curious kind of what that experience has been like for folks to find you in that space and to be willing to maybe have those sort of spiritual conversations with you, because you are Laurie, but you are also Laurie the priest.
One of the women at the barn has this great story where she didn't know I was a priest. So actually, I officiated the wedding of my horse trainers. And so I'd been riding for a few years, so I officiated, I baptized their son, so clearly I live, I've done some funerals for some of the people who've died. So, but one of the women who rode there didn't know I was a priest until she saw me officiate Steph and Chris's wedding. She comes up to me at the reception and she says, "Damn it, I wish you'd told me that you were a priest. I wouldn't have sworn so much around you." And I thought, do you listen to me ride? Because clearly that's not a problem with me. One of the things that I've, for a long time I said, these are separate worlds, and they are in some ways. I mean, my barn family is certainly my barn family. And the gift that they've given me is to realize that being kind and listening isn't something that just priests do. We all have the capacity to be present for others. Now, do I have the capacity to be present with someone who is dying in a different way because it's just something I've done for 20-some odd years? Yeah, so there is a level there. But I think it really has reminded me that we're all called to kindness and presence. And this isn't a gift I have because I'm a priest. I know priests, they're not all kind and present. So, I think that we're reminded that we're all called to that. I do think one of the differences that people are much more willing, because I am a priest, to come to me about things that they may not, because they know that I'm not going to go then post it on Facebook. Like, you'll never believe what Jane said about such and but I also think, I love the fact that, it's a hard place to be, but when you're at a barn, life, I've watched horses be born. I've helped them stand up, and then I've been with people and horses when they've died. And I think that there is something that I treasure. It's a bittersweet feeling to know that I'll get the call from somebody who says, "We just got the news that we have to euthanize, one of the horses. Can you say a prayer? Can you be with me on the phone? Can you come out?" And what I realize is that's a place that not everybody gets to go in. And whether I'm there because I'm a priest or because of this relationship I have with these people, that's a God thing. But I recognize the value of that and the gift of that. And for a long time, I really tried to keep them separate, and then I just sort of gave up and said, okay, this is just all going to kind of mash together, and I'm going to trust that God will let me know what I need to keep separate and what I don't need to.
So when I was in Lexington, there was a parishioner at Good Shepherd, and they had a horse farm, and they had invited me to come out and visit. And the day I got there, it turned out the day before a horse had died. And things they don't teach you in seminary, right? So a horse had died. And so I was going to be there when they dug a grave and buried this horse. And it was a very significant horse for them. On the one hand, it had been wildly successful and had made a lot of money. But I mean, I was with people in grief, right? And I remember thinking again, it's remarkable to have this experience. And folks sort of said a few words about the horse. They asked if I would pray. I mean, it was a powerful experience, and just watching folk realizing. I mean, I think now I've through a conversion experience have become a dog person, right, with Jerry Lee. I mean, I think horses are not necessarily like dogs. I mean, horses obviously are not all just loving animals all the time, but I think kind of what we learn about ourselves when we encounter an animal over time and how they can disarm us or reflect back to who we are. So it was just a powerful moment that day to be present with these folk at the death and then the burial of this horse. Realizing, I think when we go into those places, we learn a lot about how people need us to show up.
And how much just showing up matters. I mean, it is, there's not a lot of, it doesn't take, you don't have to go to seminary or have a college degree to just show up. Answer the phone, and to give permission for people to be vulnerable and authentic. I think that's the thing that clergy are often, we do because we've hopefully learned that, but, to never say to somebody, oh, it was just a horse. I always think I would never say, well, it's just your grandmother. We would never do that. And I would never say to somebody, oh, it's just your pet. No, this was a presence of love, and a particular presence of love that can only exist in that capacity, whether it be horse or cat or dog, and to validate, yes, this is a moment, and this is a great. And what's really hard is the difference, and we all have this, is that when somebody dies who is beloved to us, we grieve as clergy, and I think that's kind of the hard part. Is okay, then I have to go and say, gosh, this is really sad. One of our close friends, we said farewell to her. She got a new call and kind of pandemic-y, and so her farewell evensong, my parish hosted it. So we're in the evensong, and I can feel my phone go off. And this isn't the time when we are kind of learning how to do the live streaming. And so the live streamers would text me if a mic had gone out or whatever. So I thought that was it, and I picked it up to see that Tipatina, who is in the front of the book as a dedicated, had died. And she was, she was not supposed to die. She colicked, which is basically intestinal distress, and died. And I was already crying because Elise was leaving, and I was just burst into full-on ugly cry at that moment. And and the bishop looks and he goes, I know it's sad Elise is leaving. And I remember thinking no. And I just looked at him, I said, no, Tippy's dead, a horse. And I just saw that look on his face, okay, I know I need to say that this is but what I found is that we all gathered at the barn later, and we all talked about, because everybody had the story of when Tippy took us all to our first blue ribbons. Your job was to sit up there and look cute, and she'd do the work. And what I realized is she had done something for a room full of people, and there's probably 20 of us in there, over her life, because she had reminded us all that we were all worthy of a first place ribbon. And don't we all want that? Don't we all know that yay? Because I have days where I suck all day long, really suck. But for that one moment, I got to take a victory lap on Tippy. And she did it for so many people. tell me that's not worth grieving. And that's the thing that you just like give space for that kind of love and that grief. And that's what you do in those spaces, whether you're a priest or not.
I know a lot of these folks have read the book. Is there a particular passage right now you'd want to share with us from the book?
I can share one of them, which I forgot mine, so I have to borrow Brian's.
Here's a book.
There's a book. Woohoo. So one of the rules of preaching I learned very early was never preach on a parishioner, because it will come back to bite you in the ass in ways that you cannot imagine. And that means good or bad preaching. So I abide by that. I don't write about parishioners, except this one slight exception. And she died, so I guess I get a pass on that one. But I do think it's important to kind of realize that the stories don't just fall out of nowhere, even though sometimes it feels like they do. My church is 67 years old, so that means that we don't have any money, but we also don't have all of the baggage that 200-year-old churches have. And I'll take that every time. And Marie Glover was the last of the original founders of the church. And she was still there when I was called as rector. And Miss Glover, because that is always what I called her, had some health issues. And I had been riding one day, so I was at the barn, covered with sweat and horse snot and all the other fun things at the barn. And I had gotten in my car, got a phone call, and Miss Glover had gone into the hospital, and it was her daughter. And I called her back and said, I'm happy to come, but I've been at the barn. Would you like me to go home and clean up first? And she said, no, just come. Now, I will say this about Miss Glover. Miss Glover never had a hair out of place, ever. So I thought, I'm going to go see this woman in the hospital, who I know will look fabulous, and she did. And I looked like I crawled up from the sewer. So I go into the emergency room. I'm with her, and we all sort of knew that this was her fading moments. She died a week later. But I was sitting in the ER with her, and I, said to her daughter, if you need to go get some water, you need to call anybody, do that, I'll stay with your mom. And she said, so I was sitting there. And they had to come in and do some procedures on Miss Glover. And I said, would you like me to step out? No. She goes, I just want you to sit here and hold my hand and talk with me. And I did. And she died a week later. And I remember feeling not only my grief about her death, but the grief of the parish that the last person who had founded that holy place had died. And I didn't know what to do with that grief. And I wrote some notes down in my journal. And then about 6 months later, when I was working on some stuff, I went back to that. And fast forward now, 10 years. And this is the chapter that came out of that experience and that feeling. I hold things. Holding things doesn't come with detailed instructions or reflective books we can read and discuss in small groups. We come into the world knowing we need to hold things and learning how to hold things. It's not brain surgery. It's simply holding things. Babies hold the fingers of their parents. Children hold the hand of an adult as they are in a busy, crowded place. I hold reins as I ride and hold the paten as I distribute the body of Christ to people. I hold the hands of little boys who are being baptized who aren't sure they will be able to walk up the step stool by themselves. I hold the hands of people in prayer circles as we gather for holy time. I hold the hands of precious ladies as they have yet another needle stick for a medical test that will hurt. But we talk about the weather, our weekly trips to the beauty parlor instead. I hold the hands of those who are making their final great journey until they let go and take the hands of God who is waiting for them just beyond the place we can see from this side of the kingdom. I hold anger and pain, Often life is too much, too hard, too hurtful, too sad, too horrible for one person to hold all those feelings. So we share our heartaches and gashes of our souls. We hold some of that pain for the other. We don't fix it or redeem it or give meaning to it. Nope. We just hold it for a while. I even hold joy, those amazing moments of laughter and delight when new life and light burst forth. Shield the joyous, we pray. I do by holding some of it as well. Like the effervescence of life overflowing, we get showered by that joy. Hold on to that when it comes your way. I hold silence. Life is noisy, and it is also silent. We seem to be profoundly good at adding words to the world, but holding silence is a bit harder. I hold that too. Quiet, still silence to allow for the sighs too deep for words to have their place. I hold people in their pain and grief. I hold them if they need to be held and cry. If they don't want to be held, I hold myself in that place and just sit with them, and they cry. I cry too at times. Sometimes I've wondered if someone would ever stop crying, or if I would ever stop crying. I hold tissues as they gather the tears. Again, I don't fix anything. I just hold. I even hold a fair amount of crazy. We all do. We hold each other's eccentricities and outburst over minor things because the major things are simply too scary to face. When we love others, when we serve and care, we hold. Holding doesn't provide lofty answers or intricate theology. It just offers presence and hands to share the weight of whatever burden we may be feeling. Holding isn't complicated or big. It is intimate and small, offering one of the simplest acts of humanity. Babies hold. Children hold. Children of God hold, even if for a short time. But I need things held as well. We can forget that when we are holding another's things, then one day we feel overwhelmed, weighted down, and crushed underneath all the things. So where do I put them? Perhaps one of the great gifts of my horse Nina is that she gives me space for all the holding I do in my life. And when I ride, she reminds me that I can't hold everything all the time. So she says, "Hop up, Mom, and let me hold you for a while as we ride." She holds me in her unique and elegant way. I hold the reins to guide her. She is, after all, very good at making me feel useful in this way. We walk, and I look at the world through her ears, two fuzzy, expressive guides that remind me to focus on what's in front of me and not be quite so distracted by all the periphery, even if only for an hour or so. We trot, and she holds me as I sit back and up, opening my chest and shoulders, which are often tight and crunched from worry and stress. Open up, her gait tells me. Breathe deeply and ride. We canter, and she holds me as I sit deeply in her beautiful, easy canter that rhythmically massages my lower back with each stride, rolling and stretching the muscles that too often hold tension and pain. I sit deep and quiet, and for these few moments, feel her movement unlock the tension in my back and free my soul to fly. She holds me, my joy, my grief, my disappointments, and my excitement. She holds all of my soul, carefully and with grace and strength, the way that God holds me. In all these ways, Nina holds me so that when I need to hold something again, I'm ready. Of all the things we do, perhaps our ability to hold things is one of the purest incarnations of love for humans and for horses. It's always so weird to read.
Yeah, that was.
It's just weird.
In the book, you mention that barns are a particular type of holy place. I'm aware that having lived in Kentucky and driving through horse farms, barns are almost cathedral-esque in size. But I'm curious, for you, when did you really discover the sense of a barn as a holy place? Was there a certain moment or memory where that sense came to you?
I think it was one of those moments, like little tiny pieces, and then one day I went, oh, wow. One of the things that I realized, one of the aspects of church buildings that I love is to think about the thousands of prayers that have been said in here. And I think all of those prayers go into the walls and the foundation, and we're surrounded by prayers that have been said by generations. And I remember going into the barn one day, and probably after I was really tired and wanted to go sell mascara at Sephora because of whatever happened at the church, and I was mad at something, and I picked up a pitchfork to clean out muck from one of the stalls. And just kind of in that moment, I realized, so I swear, because I'm from the South, but it takes a particular holy place to make shoveling shit a good thing. Like, you can't really even do that in a church. And I could do that there. I was in that moment, and I just thought, this is what I want to be doing this. Like, I wasn't mad that I had to do it. Like, oh, this Nina's stall's there, clean her stall out. While I'm doing it, Gloria's out. And I just remember sort of the rhythmic movement of that and thinking, this is the stuff of creation. We are close to it there. If you go digging some dirt, and and it was just, you hear people talk about thin spaces, and it was just a thin space of being in that. Because, again, like, there's not an essay. I would not preach that from the pulpit. Like, you want to find God? Go shovel a pile of horse shit. But that's what happened. And I just kind of stopped and looked around, and I realized, like, I could tell the story of all the horses that were in those stalls, and I could tell the story of the horses that had been in those stalls, because, horses move on, they go out. Some horses do better outside than inside, and I could tell the story of, like, oh, I remember, when that piece of wood got knocked out because a horse got loose. To be able to tell the story of a place is a holy act. We do that every Sunday in church. We tell the story of our church, of our community. And holiness to me comes not because somebody blessed it, but because it's filled with stories, and the stories have meaning to us, and those stories have changed us. And that was, when I realized, like, oh, this barn, this is a holy place. It is where I can come be probably my most authentic self, and that's to me what a holy place is, where we can just, like, here I am, Lord. Send me, dirty and gross and mad about something usually. So,
those of you who have read the book,
or
those of you who have not read the book, are there questions that you'd have for Laurie? I think, is Caroline? Do you have a mic, Caroline?
That awkward moment where everybody looks around, like,
I can come to you.
Question?
Oh, you have like the Oprah mic.
Yeah.
I do have an Oprah mic.
That's an Oprah mic.
Is it working?
That might want to make people ask a question in and of itself.
Okay.
Who wants to hold them?
Who wants to hold the
Claire
Oprah
Keith.
mic? I would want to hold the Oprah
Claire
mic.
does. Claire does.
I don't have to stand up.
You don't.
I'm not standing up.
You don't have to do it.
Caroline asked me a couple of weeks ago to talk with folks here on a Sunday night about the book. And I'm not a horsewoman. I was on my dad's horse a couple of times. He was 15 hands high, and I was about 8 years old, and it was pretty scary. But what really struck me with the book and with the whole notion of riding horses, and is very important to me as a priest, is that sense of embodiment that that we come to know most deeply who we are when our heads shut up because our bodies are alive and we're engaged with them beyond whatever thought I'm having about something today. Can you talk about that a little bit? I mean, I'll say one more thing. I used to coach women in having babies, taught the couples, and there's something definitely a lot about that is extremely embodied and that teaches us things we couldn't learn any other way. And I think having a 1,000-pound horse, me being on top of it, puts me in a whole different relationship to my body and the horse's body, and it's a holy thing. But what do you think about that?
I agree with all of that. I think, we live, particularly as clergy, we live in our heads a lot, for good or ill, but we can live up there so much that we can forget, like, this part of it, that there's something wonderful about embodiment. I mean, incarnation is fundamental to our Christian faith. I mean, the Word became flesh. And yet we often treat this flesh like it's an annoyance. We look at me and like, I feel bad about my neck and all this other stuff. And, but when I get on a horse, I have to feel every part of my body. I mean, I can't think this horse into doing. And in fact, one of my instructor's favorite things is quit thinking. Quit thinking and just ride the damn horse, usually is what she says. And there is something so powerful about not thinking. And because I think we rationalize ourselves into not experiencing emotions. We rationalize ourselves into, it's been a year since my husband died, therefore I am through grieving, Or, it's Christmas, I should be happy, And so, but our bodies, I don't know and I always forget his whole name, but Bessel Vanders, but he has this wonderful book called The Body Keeps the Score. Please read it. It is, but our bodies tell us what's going on. I mean, people who have chronic pain, some of that may be related to like emotional stuff that just like is begging to be paid attention to. And a horse is, it embodies me because you climb on the horse, you have to feel it. I mean, horses respond to pressure. And so, if I'm tight, they're tight and they're not going to flat walk and then they're going to run off with me. And, but when I sit deeply and calm and pay attention to me and it's a beautiful transfer of that. Again, and some of that goes back to horses are prey animals. So they are attuned to movements that even I don't know. I mean, Nina will canter. We have cues, so horses have cues so they know what to do. And for those of you who ride, Nina's so good at cantering, I don't even have to say anything or move the reins. I just lean, and she'll step off into the canter. And if you were watching me, you could not see me move. That's how attuned she is to my body. There's a saddle and a pad between her skin and my butt. And she can feel me shift and go, she wants me to canter. To be writing something that has that kind of communication level with your physical self, not your mouth, not your words. This is occasionally, don't use your words, use your body. It calls me back into that space. And it really is kind of a magical thing to think like, gosh, I don't say control this animal because you really don't. I can negotiate with this animal and I can use this wonderful body that God gave me and value it. Not criticize it, not wish it were 20 pounds lighter or my hair wasn't turning gray. None of it, just like, wow, this is a gift. And the other thing I think about that presence is because they are prey animals, they have to know who you are. Like, they don't want you to rush into their stall. Well, probably most of us, if we're honest, don't like people rushing into our space either. And just to be aware of how much, when I do some groundwork, and that's taking a horse and you're standing in the middle and they're going around, in a circle, and you're walking and trotting and all that. I can do that with some of the horses without any rope at all. I only use my presence and my voice. And I will say, siblings in Christ, that is a holy moment to realize the gift of this body, of all of our bodies, and how we can influence another person. I mean, y'all are all smaller than Mo. Mo's a pony. Mo gained a lot of weight during the pandemic. He's probably 1,200 pounds. I always ask Mo when he's thinking about dropping his foal, and he doesn't appreciate that, I think. But, the fact that I can work him on the ground with nothing but my presence, with no lunge line, no nothing, it's just a reminder of the presence and power of our bodies, and to remember that we need to remember that gift, and we need to remember that power.
So can you correlate that a little bit with your experience of embodiment in worship?
Yes, I can. And part of it is I came, much like Bishop Brian, I was a Baptist. And I remember the first time that I came into an Episcopal church and people were kneeling, and I thought kneeling was the cat's pajamas. I was like, I'm gonna kneel all the time, Oh wait, we cross ourselves. When we anoint and touch another person, that matters. And it matters in ways that I can't even put words into. But just to come into the church all alone and kneel, and just feel sort of the smallness of me, and many of us who kneel, and the holiness of that moment, that matters. I think that's one of the things the pandemic really, at least called to my mind, is, yes, I missed communion, and love all that, fill in the blanks on all that, but there was something about being with other people, and standing and sitting and kneeling, and shaking hands at the peace. St. Michael's breaks down to coffee hour at the peace, but all of those things, it matters. And I think that one of the reasons I love the Episcopal Church is that embodiment is important to us, that we're not a completely intellectual faith, regardless of what we like to say about ourselves, that it matters that we are sitting here together. We can pray just by sitting together.
I'd like to change the subject a little bit when you talked about being there for other people. It brought up when my father died, my brother's friend. In New York, funerals are like a big deal. Like you have visitation in the afternoon from 1 to 4. And then you take a break, and then you come back till 7 till 9. Okay, so that's a long time. And my friend's brother, and they had been a little bit estranged, my brother's friend, and he came anyway, and he just came and sat. He didn't say anything. For all that 5 hours, he just came and sat. And it was like, wow, of my father's funeral, that is the only thing I remember, to tell you the truth. And it's our being, just to be there, because sometimes things are beyond words. And just being there and using our bodies to show somebody that you care is enough. And I just thought I would bring that up.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's one of the great lessons that I've learned from horses, is that you can communicate so much and never say a word. I can assure you I know much of what Nina thinks about the change in her feed, or the fact that there's a new horse in the, and she doesn't speak English. She speaks horse, but, just being there and knowing her. I think that's another part, is just being in relationship with each other. We learn each other.
And I've heard, I think it was Henry Nouwen who said,
I feel like we can drink now. You've quoted Henry Nouwen.
okay,
Yes.
that we expect too much, sometimes we expect too much from speaking and not enough from silence. And so that person who sat there for 5 hours said a lot, right? Other question? Okay.
Early in your book, you were talking about transitions from one, like from trotting
One gait to
into
another.
cantering, and what you were learning about the horse and making those transitions, and how you had to communicate to the horse, but you had to also feel where the horse was to know how to get to the next thing you were doing. I wonder how that has translated to the way you interact with people and what you've learned about transitions in your own life, but also in interactions that you have with people in the back and forth, and whether that's informed the way you interact.
So to give a little background, all horses have three basic gaits: the walk, the trot, and the canter or gallop. And a canter is just a slow gallop, essentially. And so what you see horses do at the Kentucky Derby is a gallop on crack, but it's a gallop. So, but the trot is actually what they will use to go. So if you take nothing away from tonight, when you watch those Westerns and they tear out at a gallop, no. Horse can't run a gallop for a long time, but they can trot for a long time. But you sit a walk and you post a trot, and posting a trot is an up-down. So it's a 2-beat gait movement because the horse's alternate legs move. You can Google posting a trot, and you'll get to see. But part of what that does is the horse, because the movement is this way, you're not pounding on the horse's back. So you're actually absorbing the movement. And then a gallop, you mostly sit a gallop. So in a canter, so you have to sit very deeply. And so you're from, like I would say, from your waist down, you're very still. And from here up, you're very still. But that little part is the hinge. But then you also will see, like the Kentucky Derby, they ride what we call a 2-point stance, and that you're completely out of the saddle. And that's a balance stance, allows the horse to go faster, and I write explicitly about the 2-point stance in the first one and the challenge of that and forgiveness. But what you do when a horse transitions down, because they're moving forward, and if you're not paying attention to what they're doing, because sometimes your body's in different places, you might fall forward on the horse or fall forward off the horse. And so you have to kind of, and so you also need to tell the horse what they're doing and all these other fun things. So my instructor has said, and she's exactly right, that you can always tell a good equestrian by transitions, because they control the transition. You sort of want to slow a horse down, all these technical things there. But the gist of what I have learned about transitions is that they take an immense amount of core work. I mean, you just don't, there are days that I've had transition-only lessons that the next morning I thought, I'm going to have to lie in bed the whole day because my core work. It is work, and it's work that you can't see. So if you're watching somebody do transition work, it just looks really pretty, like, well, they're sitting up there. Gosh, they're just sitting a lot. Where that has informed me is that in the church, particularly in the Episcopal Church, we love to talk about liminal space, don't we? Oh, this is such a liminal space. See, all the clergy are like, Liminal space, for those of you who might have been blessed to not hear of it, is the space in between. So liminal comes from a Latin word that means basically like the doorway. Liminal space is the space in between. And we love to talk about it, but it's transitional space. When I say liminal space is we finally got the dining room just like we wanted it, and the house burned down. That's liminal space. Because now what? That's the space where now what? And I feel like we're living in this extended liminal space with COVID. Like, now what? It takes work. It's hard. It's a lot of core work that nobody can see. You wake up in the morning and you think, I need more Advil. There's just not enough Advil. But that's the measure, I think, of faith. How do we ride the transitions? how do we transition in the liminal space? Because what we really want to do is not to do it. Like I don't. I wrote a book about it and I don't want to do it. You know, we want to just get to the next thing. And that often, you know, I mean, like an example is, you know, the person who's had a relationship end, and instead of kind of staying in that liminal space to maybe figure out, like, well, what went wrong with the relationship? What might I learn from this? What do we want to do? I have friends who go find other partners. Do y'all not? Do y'all have, because y'all have healthy friends who like go to therapy and stuff, or do y'all have people like mine? You know, and then what happens? Well, all the same stuff shows up in that relationship, and then they end that one, and then what do? Go to therapy? No. We're gonna, so, but I think that's the temptation, because that's just so much easier. And I get that ease. You know, it's a whole lot easier if I know a horse is, you know, I mean, some horses need longer transitions than others because of size and all that sort of stuff. It'd be just easier to get mad at the horse. You know, like, oh, I don't want to do this, or fall forward on them. That's a whole lot easier to do. It takes work to ride that transition with awareness that that's what's happening, and the grace and the very quiet strength to do it, in which you don't do in a transition. And that's the other thing in Westerns, you see where they'll stop, they'll like yank that. If I did that on any horse I ride, they would throw me off and step on me and enjoy it. And then they'd go like, you know, you don't do that. You transition with your whole body, not that. Most of the horses that I tell to stop, I sit. And they're like, oh, she wants me to stop now. But that's taken a lot of work to get to that. And to trust myself to do that, because this is, I'm doing something right. I'm going to get me a new boyfriend. He's going to be better. You know, I think that's what it's taught me about. And also, you know, you talk about the relationship with people, to be very grace-filled with people who are in liminal space, because it's so hard and we so want not to be there. We want to yank on those reins, flip that horse's head back and look like a cowboy. And I think that's the hard part of our world right now, is we are in this extended, going now on, you know, what, 3 years? I don't know. How, we've been in the 727th year of the pandemic, and we're all still in this liminal space in the church. And what are we doing? I have started to watch it come out. We've got this new program we're going to do. We get this new idea of how we're going to be the church. It's hard to stay there. Richard Rohr talks about liminal space. It's the greatest thing on earth. I'm like, Richard Rohr, you are a saint, because I don't want to stay there. But riding that transition that's the work that we're called to do.
I have one last question for you.
Okay.
Union Avenue Books is here, and they're going to be selling the book. Some of y'all already have. Do you have? Ralph, do you have a question? So I'm going to cede my last question to Ralph Wood here. But Ralph, before your question, Laurie, after you answer this,
okay,
we're going to let you head back there to sign some books.
All right.
We want to thank Union Avenue Books for being here.
Yes, thank you. We love independent bookstores.
We love independent bookstores. Mm-hmm. So, Dr. Wood.
Well, first of all, many, many thanks for your book.
Oh, well, thank you.
I read it with absorbing interest. I had no idea what went into horsemanship. Having grown up on a horse, having ridden every afternoon from the time I was in the 4th or 5th grade and got home from school, all I did was saddle up my horse, get on her, and strike out. Nothing ever occurred to me that there could be more than that. And I confess there are few greater thrills than to be on the back of a 2,000-pound horse, going flat out, and I'm on her bareback, hanging on for dear life by her mane, and my legs, that if I go off, I'm probably dead.
We love that. It's equestrians know it. I know.
So, my question. Do you ever have any fear, doubt, worry, that your avocation might become your vocation, and vice versa. That what you do is fundamentally master horses. And on Sunday, your avocation might be the church.
Oh, all
Is
the
that
time.
ever, hang on, is that ever a doubt or fear?
It's not ever in doubt that I'm called to be a priest in the church. I learned a while ago to quit telling God this is how I was going to do the world. And I think that I don't ever want to be a horse trainer. Like that just isn't, in my vocation. But let me tell you, if I got a big fancy show horse and could spend my life going from show to show, letting her walk into the ring like she owned it, I'd do it in a minute. I mean, you get it. I mean, the last horse I showed, who was new in the barn at the last show, she and I have had some challenging rides, but we got it, in just that moment. But when I showed her, and I always said the end of the story is not we didn't win. We actually came in second, and that was fine. But just that feeling of her finally saying to me, "You know how to ride me, and I know what kind of rider you are." And I remember we came down one of the straightaways, at a trot, and her little head was up, and saddlebreds are just really known for their big trots. And one of my friends said, she said, like watching you and Pepper come down that straightaway at that trot, like she goes, like, and she's an Episcopalian. She said, I finally understood what Shield the Joyous was, because I wanted to just encircle that moment, because it's wonderful. And what I say is, that is such a gift to have a hobby that I love that much, and to have a vocation that I love this much, that I don't have to choose between them, that God has muddied them together in a way that I would never expect. And that is, living the dream in Kentucky. So, and I get to, I love to say, like, so Nina, I thought you were going to ask me, do I ever have any fear when I ride the horse? I'm like, oh yeah, because they're big. And Nina's my horse. She's on the back cover. We migrated from the first book. We had a black and white photo to a color, so we got a color on the back one. Nina is retired from showing. She's kind of a trail horse, and she teaches little bitties. But she's a tall horse, because I'm taller. So, and she teaches little bitties how to ride, but doesn't show. But Nina's. I probably hadn't had Nina 6 months when she got spooked by another horse, and she went off, and I went into a fence, and I had 5 broken ribs and a punctured lung and a concussion. So it went from that to, this now horse that I sit on and can turn it back, So that's another story. But part of that avocation and vocation to me has always been how do we help people live their lives in love? And how to help myself do that, because I need a lot of help in that. And we had a young woman that came to the barn who was differently abled, and her mother's an equestrian, and this was during the pandemic, and she wanted her daughter to stay physically active, but it was not safe for her to go to a gym. And so this young woman started to ride horses, and she's in her early 20s, and she saw us showing, and she decided that she wanted to show. So she told her mom, like, I want to show. And her mom said, well, I don't know, but let's. So my instructor came to me and said, well, what do you think about, she rides Nina, and Nina's birth. She goes, what do you think about letting Nina go, let her show Nina? And I was like, well, do you trust it? And she, oh yeah. So we did. And first of all, my horse loves this young woman more than she loves me. There's no doubt. And she's in the ring, and Nina looks like, she is the best horse in the world, and don't know each other. And to watch them ride together, I think, this is the same horse that sent me to the hospital I didn't think I was ever going to get on again, and thank goodness I did. And my job as her owner, maybe, was to help her find this young woman. And that is the glimpse of the holy. And if you take two things away, that we don't gallop all the time, but the second thing is our job as Christians is to not only help the holy come into the world, but to just see it when it happens and take that in. 20 years ago, when I was a brand new baby priest and had been ordained 15 minutes, if you had asked me to describe God, I would have given you this beautiful, long answer that God bless Ward Ewing probably had to read as my seminary dean. But tonight I sit here and tell you that the glimpse of God is that young woman and Nina riding around the show ring, not caring what ribbon they got, but knowing that this is what love looks like.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
So the bookstore's here to sell books. I got you all this orange UT swag that I was going to share with you.
Thank you.
But you're an Alabama fan.
I
and
am.
So you would have thrown it away anyway, so I didn't bring it. But we are glad that you came.
I am glad, and God bless, what is it? Sometimes you just got to let Tennessee win the game.
Anyway, so thank you. And so if you'll head back there, folks will be there to let you sign some books. Thank you.
I will. Thank you all so much.